The Kibbie Dome celebrates its 50th birthday in 2025, although that's a bit of a misnomer. Yeah, the dome was finished in 1975, but the rest of the stadium actually opened in 1971. By the way, the original remnants of the dome are likely few and far between, considering it was never up to fire code until 2009, and the thing was leaking from basically day one. These days, the Kibbie Dome is iconic, the eighth and a half wonder of the sporting world, but there is so much more to this story than meets the eye. And I'm not just talking about the old racquetball courts that professors would insist on using during Idaho football game days. Video and video games simply do not do the Kibbie Dome justice. Nestled there on the western edge of campus along the hills of the Palouse, it is a sight to behold from the outside, and what's inside, it's like entering another world. Perhaps the only thing more astonishing than the dome itself is just how it came to be over the past 50 years. From award-winning engineering to end-zone seating that would never come to fruition, from football to basketball to track and field to intramural soccer games featuring yours truly. From hosting first-round NFL draft picks to Tim Floyd. From multi-million-dollar renovations to the stadium's namesake donor, William Kibbie, probably never actually fulfilling his donation to the school, but still getting to keep his name on this beautiful, wonderful, weird, quirky sporting facility. This is the true story of America's most unbelievable stadium.
On to the Kibbie Dome field they come.
We're a long way from home. Welcome to the pleasure dome.
Enter the dome. Hear the thunder.
It's always amazing to see, actually being in here is totally different, surreal experience.
We invite you to look into the amazing cover that's taken Moscow by storm and in from out of the cold.
Grass looks much greener, but it's green painted cement.
We're the Vandals, and we're here for the whack.
Oh, I'm afraid they're not ready for you yet.
Idaho, Idaho, Idaho.
Good evening, basketball fans, and welcome to the Kibbie Dome on the University of Idaho campus.
The University of Idaho is seeking funding for the aging ASUI Kibbie Dome.
Like they do it out in Idaho.
Watch the second half, you're going to love it.
There is a quote from now TCU head coach Sonny Dykes about the Kibbie Dome that now seems to get used in nearly every story about the facility. I played there in 2011 when I was at Louisiana Tech. I love the place. There were between 6,000 and 8,000 people at the game, and it sounded like between 60,000 and 80,000. It was deafening. I've coached in a bunch of big places, and that was as loud as any place I've ever been. The problem is, it's a bunch of crap. The announced attendance on that day was 15,309. That would almost be a sellout at the Kibbie Dome, and even if actual attendance was closer to 12,000, that is still significantly more than 6,000 to 8,000. Seriously, who knows what the hell Dykes was talking about here, and that quote is as much of an insult as it is a compliment. Nothing like saying, hey, your stadium was less than half full, but it was still a rousing good time. That's the thing about the Kibbie Dome. The true story has actually been lost over the years, awash in a sea of NCAA football posts, quick blurbs, and people playing on social media. Because this incredible looking dome is just the half of it. We start in 1969. Nice. Anyway, Idaho's rickety old Neal Stadium has finally been condemned once and for all. This happened when inspectors determined bleachers posed a significant risk to attendees. In reality, it should have happened years before that. The hills of the Palouse offer some of the most fertile farmland in all of the world. That also means it was very susceptible to erosion. Not to mention, weeds were constantly growing through the bleachers. Very little upkeep to Neal Stadium was done over the years. The fact that made it 30 years is probably as big of a mystery as anything else. With no home on campus, the Vandals would spend that 1969 season playing at Washington State's Rogers Field. It was not a great year for the team, who recently regained their university division status, the top level of college football at the time. Things, though, were only starting to go up in flames. A day after Idaho's season concludes, one side of Neal Stadium burns to the ground. It is reported that arson was the suspected cause, although no evidence is given. The fire did give Vandals a reason to cheer. It was reported by the student newspaper, the Argonaut. Around 500 folks came out to watch the facility burn. That would be one of only a string of fires in the inland Northwest. A few months later, over in Pullman, half of Wazoo's Rogers Field would would be destroyed in another suspected arson. Someone went back a month later and started another blaze. That person was caught. There was a similar fire near a press box at an athletic facility in Spokane's Whitworth College. And then there were a few more fires at racetracks in Portland and Yakima. This has become a big mystery. Were all of these connected? Was there just someone who really hated stadiums in the Northwest? The thing is, all of this conspiracy theory talk misses a pretty big point that shows up right there in the Argonaut article covering the blaze. At least as it relates to Neal Stadium, students were using the condemned press box as a drinking spot. Someone was most likely smoking up there too, and some ashes or a haphazardly disposed of cigarette butt or roach is just hucked aside, and the next thing you know, this mostly wooden structure goes up in flames. As for Rogers Field, I mean, who knows? WSU officials were happy to be rid of it, although the most likely cause here is an accident. The Whitworth fire and the racetrack fires are definitely their own things, and none of these were ever actually solved by fire officials. With two burnt husks of stadiums now populating the Palouse, both Washington State and Idaho needed a place to play for 1970. The Cougars decided they were going to go up the road and play at Joe Albee Stadium in Spokane, and Idaho made a very curious choice. The athletic department was like, we're just going to keep playing in this smoldering wreckage one town over until we figure out our situation. This, of course, leads to the famous 1970 Battle of the Palouse, which is known as the Homeless Bowl, because Idaho traveled to an away game against Wazoo in Spokane, even though they were using the Cougars' home for their home games that season. Crowd was pretty good for two homeless teams. The Vandals were sadly blown out. One of the great curiosities surrounding the University of Idaho is the name of the town the school is located in. Moscow. Does it have ties to the Russian city? Well, sort of. Moscow, Idaho is named after Moscow, Pennsylvania, which is named after the city in Russia. In the 1830s, a Lutheran minister and some Russian settlers established this town in Pennsylvania. And then in 1877, Samuel Neff applied for a postal permit and without consulting anyone else picked Moscow because the area reminded him of his hometown in Pennsylvania. So is Moscow named after the Russian city? I guess indirectly that's true. That being said, things could have been a lot worse because before that name took hold, this area of America was simply called Hog Heaven. So yeah, I guess we should all be thankful the University of Idaho isn't located in Hog Heaven, Idaho. As Idaho was playing in the Homeless Bowl and at Rogers Field during 1970, there is something else happening in the state of Idaho worth mentioning. Idaho State opened the second dome stadium in America with the ASISU Mini Dome. And if we're being truthful, it's very similar to what the Kibbie Dome would become. I mean, yes, there are different layout choices and all of that, but I can't imagine the Kibbie Dome happening without the ISU Dome being built. As we enter 1971, the Idaho administration and athletic department finally gets its act together. Ground was broken on the new facility that was going to be built in phases, but it should be noted the dome isn't confirmed at this point. It is simply an add-on that could be included down the road. During an interview with the Argonaut at groundbreaking, athletic director Ed Knecht said the stadium would open in time for the first game of the season against Boise State College in September 1971. It was not. He also said that he hoped the new Idaho Stadium would be in use 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Yeah, that never happens because this is a sporting facility and not the fishbowl in front of the University of Idaho's library. The Vandals open with a home game in Boise against Boise State. Move past that result. Next was a contest in Spokane versus Colorado State. And then, for the first time since 1968, the Idaho Vandals had a home game on their campus in Moscow, Idaho. Their not yet dome stadium provided some comfort as Idaho brushed aside Idaho State 42-3. 1971 would be a very good season for the Vandals as they would be named champions of the Big Sky. Sadly, they would be pipped to an appearance in Sacramento's own Camellia Bowl by Boise State, who had a better record. There, the Broncos beat Chico State, but would then have to return the trophy and prize money due to the Broncos having used an ineligible player. After the season and for the next few years, work continues on what is known as New Idaho Stadium, although this is quite the dance. The school has to make sure students can use this facility. So the first season, it had natural grass. That, though, changes. A multi-purpose surface is laid over where the grass once sat. This included basketball courts, volleyball courts, tennis courts, a track, all of the stuff that would allow students to use this facility. Of course, you can't play football on a multi-purpose, essentially asphalt track, so the school has to buy turf and lay that over the top of it. Yet it also needs to be easily rolled on and off. Again, students are going to be using this facility, so you can't just have a turf field over it for large portions of time. Also, apparently around this time, there are Arctic circles in Moscow, Lewiston, and Lewiston, slightly methier sister city Clarkston. Where was this when I was in school, by the way? Anyway, the school goes with 3M's Tartan Turf, and the company delivers the first ever fully roll-up football playing surface. Sounds really cool. The final product was an absolute nightmare. From basically day one, the thing was coming apart at the seams. The roll-up process, by the way, also didn't work correctly. Oh yeah, it cost about $500 per time to roll the turf up and lay it back down. So this wasn't exactly the best solution to anyone's problems. If that wasn't bad enough, Idaho replaces athletic director Ed Connect with Leon Green, who announces the department will need to cut its budget. Meanwhile, funding to complete the project and put the dome on top remains elusive, and that just sees the facility, New Idaho Stadium, in this weird state of half completion. Like, the walls have been built up, the sidelines are ready to support a dome, but no one can actually afford to top it off. It just looks absolutely ridiculous. Like, it clearly isn't finished, and yet you don't know if it's ever going to be finished by the time 1974 rolls around. Midway through that year, the school announces it is accepting bids for the roof. But when all of the bids come in, like, Idaho can't afford any of them. Everything is way over what the school had estimated. At this point, it's just all about cutting corners. Bidding is open for a second round, and things are just looking bleak. According to media reports, the school is a few $100,000 short from getting this project off the ground. It is November, and just as all hope is seemingly lost, William H. Kibbie enters with a $300,000 gift to more or less save the project. Another $50,000 in donations had come in, and then the students pushed through a last-minute fee hike just to ensure all of the bases are covered here. The student senate pushed this through, by the way, despite the fact the school said no new fees would be implemented only a few months earlier. Kibbie, by the way, has a very loose affiliation with the school. He spent a semester there in the 1930s. He lived in Idaho for some time as well, but it's not like he's this huge, massive alum who was really actively involved with the University of Idaho. This, though, was a massive prayer-answering donation from him, as well as the contribution from students. That is why it is officially known as the Kibbie ASUI Activity Center, or at least it was. Despite the fact students put in far more money than Kibbie ever did, the school opted to remove the ASUI part out from the name in favor of some credit union. Make no mistake, this facility should be known as the ASUI, the Associated Students University of Idaho Dome. No, being able to use the facility for intramurals is not a fair trade-off. But this is really only half of the story. It is widely believed that Kibbie never gives the university his full $300,000 pledge. The general consensus is that he put down a $50,000 deposit and said he'd be good for the rest in 1976. No other documentation exists that proves the rest of the money ever came in. We also know that at the time of the dome's opening, he had not paid because both the student newspaper and local media reported on this, prompting Kibbie's lawyer to write a very long, very dickish letter to the Argonaut, vaguely threatening them. The building does open, and all of this is simply forgotten about over the years. We will get back to the grand opening in a second. As the roof is being installed, concerns about the roof arise, namely that it could be made from flammable material. Obviously, less than ideal when you're building a structure that uses mostly wood. The general consensus is that contractors shouldn't have been using the foam they were using, but since it hadn't officially been banned, builders pressed ahead anyway. I'm sure nothing is going to go wrong here. Anyway, it is finally time for the Vandals to play a football game in Moscow at the newly christened Kibbie ASUI Activity Center, where they proceed to do the most Idaho thing ever. The Vandals lost to Idaho State. In fairness, the Bengals were a good team who went into this contest coming off wins against Wyoming and UNLV, but it was still very disheartening, and honestly, the entire 1975 season was just a wash. I mean, Wazoo hung 84 points up on Idaho that year. The Vandals finished 4-5-2. The remainder of the 1970s didn't see much in the way of good football or basketball teams play in the Kibbie Dome. That being said, there are some positives here to point out. First and foremost, the Kibbie Dome was named the United States Outstanding Structural Achievement 1976 by the American Society of Civil Engineers. Civil engineers, there's no such thing as a civil engineer. If you know, you know. The venue itself was praised for its functionality, so much so that Nevada students tried to build their own version of the Kibbie Dome in Reno. On the downside, the general consensus is that the dome was an ugly old barn, and it turned out to be a money loser for the school. Despite attempts to bring in additional vents, annual debts surpassing $10,000 were the norm in those early years. They tried bringing in different things, but it just couldn't offset the losses, and quite frankly, the Kibbie Dome couldn't, and to this day cannot compete with Pullman's Beasley Coliseum for arena events. The school was also doing some pretty dodgy accounting with student fees around this time, which only further suspicion that Kibbie never came good with any of that money in 1976. 1978 approaches and talk begins about adding locker rooms and a few other facilities to the Kibbie Dome, this being dubbed the Varsity Club Project. Oh yeah, by the way, the football team still has their locker rooms over across the street at Memorial Gymnasium, and they have to walk over to the Kibbie Dome for games. Idaho's original plan called for asking students to put up $1 million and then bringing the rest in from other sources, but that's scrapped after the measure passes by the narrowest of margins. Not wanting to upset the student body any further, they don't increase fees, and instead they scale down the project, including the removal of in-zone seating. Not the first time that'll be removed from future dome plans. The goal is just to secure funding through private donations. Don't worry, no progress will be made on this for a few more years. April 1980, in fact, that is when the school comes out with the East End Zone expansion. The big difference between that and the 1978 plan is that the project now costs nearly double. Students get railroaded into bankrolling this thing, by the way. It does get approved, but yeah, not through all of those private sources that they had hoped in 1978. Meanwhile, some students were found camping on the roof of the dome around this time. That was not the safest place to be considering the state of the roof at this time. The thing had been leaking basically since the day it opened, but the situation had gotten noticeably bad by the early 1980s. A bunch of temporary fixes had been rolled out, a lawsuit was filed, and eventually the roof does get fixed. Thankfully, the 1980s does bring about some athletic success for the Kibbie Dome, but it's not football success, at least not early on. It is actually the Idaho men's basketball team, which is the Kibbie Dome's true star. They brought joy to the Kibbie Dome faithful for the first time ever. Don Monson was hired ahead of the 1978-79 season, and he was critical to turning the Vandals into a powerhouse basketball program. They made the NCAA tournament in 1980-81 and 81-82. The latter even saw Idaho advance all the way to the Sweet 16, but it was their home court advantage that really made the side stand out. Monson's side won 43 consecutive home games at the Kibbie Dome between 1980 and 83. Crowds were massive, sometimes approaching 11,000. This brings us to one of the great Kibbie Dome myths. So the athletic department in particular reports that at one point in time, the Kibbie Dome was named as one of the 20 most difficult college basketball venues to play at by Sports Illustrated. It sounds great. It sounds really cool. The only issue you is that there's no proof of that existing. So here's what I'm thinking happened with that. In 1982, Sports Illustrated publishes an article about the Idaho Vandals men's basketball team. During much of that season, by the way, the school was regularly placed in SI's top 20 men's college basketball programs, and SI had all of these little blurbs about various teams, and sometimes these blurbs would talk about how difficult it was to play at the Kibbie Dome. I just think all of these factors came to become that one sentence about the Kibbie Dome being one of the top 20 most difficult places to play, but I have not found that article in any issue of SI from 81, 82, or 83. Now, it's very possible I missed it, but from what I can tell, it doesn't exist. Anyway, apart from a few years under Bill Trumbo, basketball stays relatively hot for the remainder of the decade as the likes of Tim Floyd, Larry Eustace, and Kermit Davis all have stints in Moscow. However, none are able to match the success Monson had. And it wasn't just the men's team to have some success around this time. Idaho would be Tara Vanderveer's first stop on her legendary coaching career. She would lead the Vandals to their first ever postseason appearance. It should be noted the women didn't always play in the Kibbie Dome, but they did get a few games in there. Despite the success of basketball, the Kibbie Dome, well, it's first and foremost a student facility, but it is second most a football stadium, and the mid-1980s would bring some solace to long-suffering Vandal fans. Dennis Erickson, Keith Gilbertson, and then John L. Smith would bring exciting football to the Dome, as well as some big names like Ken Hobart, Scott Linehan, John Freese, Mark Slayer, future World Bowl MVP Yo Murphy. These were fun times for a football program that hadn't given fans a reason to cheer in, well, ever, if we're being honest. Yet this is an era that also gets remembered with rose-tinted glasses. While loud, the Dome was rarely full during the 80s and early 90s. Home playoff games were among the worst attended of this time. That's because the Division I AA and now FCS playoffs are scheduled during some of the worst times imaginable, but that is a discussion for another day. On the plus side, someone did paint a pretty cool looking mural on the end zone walls during the 80s. Those murals would be scrubbed around the same time the school switched from traditional goalposts to the pretty famous floating goalpost the Kibbie Dome now uses. The Kibbie Dome turns 20 in 1995, well, at least the actual dome itself turned 20, and this is just a big time of change for the University of Idaho and the football program. They're going back to Division I, where an invite to the Big West Conference awaits. This means figuring out the NCAA's preposterous attendance requirements. If the first 10 years of the Kibbie Dome's existence were defined by fixing mistakes in the original build, and the second 10 years defined by using the thing, well, these next 20 years are really defined by talk of renovation and ultimately inaction. Let's not forget, Idaho had that tartan turf 17 years before replacing it. It took the school some 10 years to save up the money to replace something that was woefully out of date. The only thing slower than trying to get athletic projects off the ground at Idaho was that Jack-in-a-Box off of Highway 8 and Line Street in the early 2010s. That frickin' place, man. You know what? We need to talk about Moscow for a second.
Thank you for your order. Please pull forward.
Jack-in-a-Box in Moscow, the absolute worst. For starters, there was never more than one person ever working there, and that person was usually higher than all hell. One time I waited like an hour for 2 Jumbo Jacks and a pumpkin pie milkshake. One car went through the drive-thru, there was one other customer to come through the lobby during this time, and yet every visit was basically like this. In hindsight, I don't know why I kept going back. I hated that Arby's on Peterson, but I could tell you why I went there. They had comically fast Wi-Fi. That was great for torrenting stuff off LimeWire. You get a couple of 99-cent roast beef sandwiches, you download a few Lil Wayne mixtapes, you're good to go. Jack-in-a-Box in Moscow, the absolute worst. No wonder the thing got shut down. But yeah, in 2010, let's say, Jack-in-a-Box was Moscow's worst.
Thank you for your order. Please pull forward.
So yeah, the only thing thing rivaling the meandering incompetence of the Jack-in-the-Box in Moscow was the leadership in Idaho's athletic department between 1995 and 2019. Plans for the Kibbie Dome suffered immensely during this span due to leadership turnover, and well, the university place scandal played a big role in that as well. Plans to expand the Kibbie Dome are first mooted late in 1994 as part of the school's plan to move up to Division I. The cheapest and the easiest way by far to increase capacity at the Kibbie Dome would have been to knock out the west wall and add approximately 7,000 or so seats. The estimates come in and the $20 million price tag scares everyone away, plans are shelved, but the structure continues to show signs of aging. Robert Hoover takes over as Idaho president in 1996. He hires Mike Bond to be AD in 1998, and there's a bit of a building spree happening on campus around this time. Eventually, they just decide to forego dome expansion plans and instead focus their time and energy on the Vandal Athletic Center, which would be an addition to the original East End Zone expansion. They really just wanted to bring facilities for student athletes up to, well, the same level as other schools in the West Coast around that time. No new seats did mean the Kibbie Dome went unused for football in 1999, as well as parts of the 2000 and 2001 season, as the Vandals played games over in Pullman. As part of 30-year celebrations of Neal Stadium's condemnation, burning to the ground, and needing to play games at Washington State. Hold on one second. Oh, that's not right. This was done so the school could meet NCAA attendance requirements. As that was happening, the Kibbie Dome was receiving a much-needed revamp for basketball. I say much needed because in 1997, a New Mexico State men's basketball player was struck by a discus from nearby track practice during the team's shoot-around. Curtains and specialized lighting were added to give the basketball setup a more intimate feel. It did also ensure any stray track and field apparatus would not be able to strike someone using the basketball court at any given moment. Oh look, Boise Sports Media's Mike Prater criticizes the Cowan Spectrum setup in an Idaho Statesman article before a game has even been played or he has ever seen it in person. Now, where was I? Oh yes, the Kibbie Dome. It is 2004 and a lot of things are happening. President Bob Hoover steps down in 2003 after a scandal over finances for a satellite campus in Boise known as University Place. Bone leaves a few months later with replacements not hired for either one until 2004. The Vandals once again have to play a couple of games over at Washington State's Martin Stadium to meet the NCAA's onerous attendance requirements, and plans for the Vandal Athletic Center are scaled down from the $12 million original concept. In fact, a very generous donation, and a real one unlike William Kibbie's donation, came from Norman Becky Iverson to ensure something impressive was built, the Iverson Speed and Strength Center, which opened in 2004. Other elements of the project are also completed around this time, but that is really the showpiece of this project. And who knows if anything gets done if it wasn't for the donation from the Iversons. Another positive, the school finally gets an invitation to join the WAC. Most attention here now turned towards the Kibbie Dome itself, which hasn't really undergone a lot of work apart from some minimal maintenance upkeep, just to ensure the thing wasn't flooding from roof leakages. The problem is that it takes forever for new athletic director Rob Spear to come up with any plans, and whenever he does come up with something, it is like ridiculous pie-in-the-sky pipe dreams that don't have a chance in hell at getting off the ground. This was especially true because the university was still feeling the pinch from the University Place scandal. Donations went down significantly in the aftermath of that. In fact, they went from about $30 million in one year to $7 million the next when Hoover resigned. 2005 brings the first round of surveying, trying to figure out if something can be done with the Kibbie Dome or if the school needs to build a new stadium. Then nothing happens. 2006 arrives and suddenly Spears talking about not only expanding the Kibbie Dome but building a basketball arena adjacent to it. In fact, he was going to announce plans right around the 2006 spring football game, lol. On the bright side, the Kibbie Dome finally gets a video board after someone bailed on an order to Darktronics and Idaho officials picked it up for a significant discount. Also around this time, the fire marshal comes out for an inspection and eventually finds that the dome does not meet fire code. there are numerous health and safety issues that can no longer be ignored. This leads to one of the most chaotic planning periods in Kibbie Dome history, where a lot is promised. There are 3 different tracks of renovations and projects launched, but the athletic department does a terrible job organizing and explaining these to the public, and nothing really gains any traction. First, you have the life safety upgrades. These must happen for the Kibbie Dome to remain usable and not befall the same fate that fell Neal Stadium in 1969. The good news is that funding for these is going to come through the university in bonds and other things. No donations are needed, and work here includes replacing the wood end-zone walls with translucent fiberglass panels. This has to get done, and get done relatively quickly, by the way. Then you have secondary upgrades that need to be financed through private donations. These include some concourse improvements and the much talked about dig down to add more seating. The third track is the pavilion project for basketball and other sports that somehow got lumped in with Kibbie Dome renovations despite being its own thing. The pavilion would need to take out the west end zone wall and be built down there, but it really was sort of seen as entirely separate. But again, the Idaho Athletic Department did such a bad job of explaining this. The latter two end up being scrapped a year later, and instead Rob Spear, the athletic director, comes out with this huge Kibbie Dome renovation plan, a lot of just bells and whistles. These have been glommed on to the life safety upgrades as far as timeline. Like, financing is going to be totally separate. The life safety improvements are going to be done through the school, and all of this other stuff will need to be privately financed, but they still have the same timeline. The total for these upgrades was $35 million, and that was to add the end zone seating, luxury boxes, club seats, a dig down. The problem is that there was a rush to get this money in. That timeline makes absolutely no sense. The life safety upgrades at the Kibbie Dome had to start in 2009. Everything was to be wrapped up before the 2011 football season. There was no way the Kibbie Dome, which school officials barely managed to afford putting a roof on, was going to be able to raise $35 million in 23 months, especially factoring in the terrible performances of the football and basketball teams throughout most of the 2000s. There was zero excitement around Vandal athletics as plans were announced. Some progress is thankfully made. 2009, and we get the first translucent wall. This goes up in the west end zone, and it is a game changer. It was so nice having natural light in the dome. With the wood walls, the Kibbie Dome was drab and dark, and you just lost all sense of time the minute you walked into it. Oh yeah, I attended classes at the University of Idaho from 2008 to 2011, so I have a first row seat for all of this transformation at the Kibbie Dome. Well, when I wasn't making a nuisance of myself at the Argonaut, the school newspaper. Newcastle scarf, mean mug, terrible hair, pissed off I had to take a staff photo instead of being at home watching MTV Jams. That is me at my pompous collegiate worst. In many ways, though, I haven't necessarily changed. Thankfully, the Kibbie Dome did change, and for the better. The university managed to secure about $10 million in private donations, including $1 million in gifts from Bud and June Ford and Lighthouse Foods. When compared to everything that had happened renovation-wise at the Kibbie Dome for the past 35 years, this was a massive success. New luxury seating, new press box, new athletic facilities. It was well done, but it wasn't the full $35 million promise. There weren't end zone seatings or balconies. The dig down didn't happen. This would rub some Idaho alum and fans and donors the wrong way. Meanwhile, the athletic department always said it had future plans in the pipeline, like this was just step one of a multi-step process, although those other steps never happen. Vandals have always been curious what else they could have instead of the Kibbie Dome when it came to a football facility for the school. It is a question broached many a time on, well, it was originally known as govandals.net, then it became All Vandals, and I think today it's just been folded into 24/7 Sports. Whatever the case may be, those posters have typed up outlandish plans on fairly regular basis. While the likes of Kermit Erickson, Joey V, and Sir Vandal are as loyal of college sports fans as you will find anywhere in the nation, some of the other posters there at govandals.net had spent one too many a night at the Corner Club. This brings me to the most ridiculous Idaho Stadium proposal that I have ever read. At some point, a poster suggested Idaho needed to build a new outdoor football stadium, but this is where things get wonky. They also wanted the school to keep the Kibbie Dome, which the football team would use in the winter if the weather was too snowy or too cold. Additionally, we're not done yet, so Idaho has 2 football stadiums, and this poster thought they needed to build a satellite football stadium in Coeur d'Alene. To this day, I struggle to understand how anyone could possibly think Idaho, of every school in the college football playing world, needed not 1, not 2, but 3 different places to play football games during a single season. Go Vandals has seen its fair share of bad facilities ideas when it comes to Idaho athletics over the years, but that is something that to this day I just cannot get over. A winning football season in 2016 and some solid men's and women's basketball teams in the 2010s were highlights for the Dome. However, those memories would fade away with the drop to FCS and Paul Petrino's just reign of football coaching terror. Attendance ebbed pretty badly towards the back end of the 2010s at the Kibbie Dome. In the years since that renovation, soccer moved into the Kibbie Dome while the school finally got a basketball arena built. Honestly, I was one of the few that was sad to see the Cowan Spectrum go. There was just something about walking out of the athletic departments over the dark, dim, multi-purpose court, stepping through that curtain and just being hit with this bright burst of light and a basketball venue appearing inside this dome. I loved it. Look, I know it's best for basketball to not be in the dome, and the university desperately needed its own arena venue just for all different types of event. I'm not going to say basketball should ever play in the Kibbie Dome again, but there was something about Cowan Spectrum that was just really amazing, at least to me. Upkeep of the Dome has certainly been better over the past decade than during really any other point of the facility's history. The multi-purpose court was redone for track and field and tennis thanks to a donation from the family of Lauren McCluskey, who regularly used the Dome while growing up in Pullman. In addition to keeping Idaho's track and field programs strong with a better indoor facility, it also allowed the Idaho men's and women's tennis teams to finally play home games in Moscow as opposed to needing to go down to Lewiston because you can't play outdoor tennis games in Moscow in February, March. You really can't play outdoor tennis really anytime, at least schedule it because the weather's so flighty there. The arrival of Jason Eck and now Thomas Ford brought excitement back to football season, even if attendance remains noticeably less than in the Vandals FBS days. Most important of all, though, the Kibbie Dome was, is, and remains a building for the students. William Kibbie may have never come through with his donation, but they have backed this legendary structure over the years. And for that, it should really be known not as the Kibbie Dome, but as the Associated Students University of Idaho Dome. It does not exist without the students over the years. The story of this iconic venue is one of what is and what could have been. People love the Kibbie Dome for its uniqueness, yet it could have also been a facility with so much more. I mean, those in-zone seats would have been awesome. The balcony seats would have been really cool. If more time and effort had gone into the planning, it's probably even better than this building we know and love today. The Kibbie Dome manages to be both a modern marvel and a disaster, an engineering feat plagued by a leaky roof and likely never up to fire code until the 2011 renovation was finished. How it never caught fire over the years is as much of a mystery as those Neal Stadium and Rogers Field fires that led to the Kibbie Dome being built. Yet through thick and thin, through failed renovation plans and leaks, through a lot of losses and a handful of memorable victories, the Kibbie Dome inspires 50 years later, 54 if you're not including the roof. Rather, you're a kid like me from Sacramento just wanting to attend school in a place different and new, or an individual like Spencer McCann who saw the Kibbie Dome while living in Florida and was so impressed he made the pilgrimage with his family to Moscow to take it in firsthand. The dome is a beacon of brilliance that draws in all. The sensory experience, the sights and sounds, it's just a small part of the Kibbie Dome story. It's not simply a place to play football or soccer or tennis or basketball once upon a time. It's not simply a place to host track and field meets. It's not simply a place for student intramurals. It is an identity. The Kibbie Dome isn't perfect, but Vandals wouldn't have it any other way. Well, apart from that one guy who thinks Idaho needs the Kibbie Dome, a separate outdoor football stadium, and a third facility in Coeur d'Alene. I mean, I don't know what he's thinking, but most of us, though, we're just happy with the Kibbie Dome. Here's to another 50 plus years for Idaho athletics in the Kibbie Dome. Thank you for watching this video. If you'd like to know more about the story of college football in Alaska, you can check out the video in the upper left-hand corner of your screen for more college football content. That'd be the playlist right there, lower left-hand corner. Until next time, I am Cheyenne Hollis. This is The Touchback, and as always, hashtag take it out to the 25.